What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Archaeo Animals Podcast, episode 2. Today we'll be talking about domestic animals. Who are they? What are they? What do they do? Why do we care? All that kind of stuff and more. I'm your host, Alex Fitzpatrick, and as always, with me is...
Simona Falanga.
Okay, so today we'll be talking about domestic animals, which is probably the bulk of zooarchaeology.
Oh, yes.
It's more or less, yeah. Hope you like farms if you're going to do zooarchaeology, because you'll probably be dealing with a lot of those animals.
Essentially.
So to start off, let's talk... Yeah, that's all you need to know, really. If you're going to go into zooarchaeology, you just need to know what a sheep and what a cow looks like. And that's it, you're set.
Yeah, I mean, like, maybe some pig every now and then, and, like, horse is a bit of a treat.
Ooh, horse. You're really treating yourself there.
No,
it's exciting when you get a horse. I've never found a horse in any archaeological assemblage I've worked on. Isn't that sad?
No, 'cause it depends really on the time period you've been mainly working on, which I guess in your case is the Iron Age?
Later prehistoric, so Neolithic through Iron Age, but I just want to find a horse, because that's cool. I'm sick of sheep.
I guess that's the bulk of it, because I guess, well, the reason why we'll probably get into it a little bit later on.
Yeah, so first off, let's talk about what domestic animals are. So like we kind of mentioned, when you're thinking about domestic animals, you're really just thinking about farm animals, things that you find in settlements, stuff like that. So let's real quick run down the list of domesticated animals.
Ooh. Well, I guess you have your box standard farm animals. You have your sheep, goat, cattle, horse. Of course, you'll get dogs and cats.
Mm-hmm.
I guess sometimes. Oh no, we're not ferrets. No, never mind.
Ferrets? What?
Definitely not ferrets. Not sure where ferrets.
I literally would not have thought of that. Am I missing some vital part of my education? Am I supposed to know?
You do find polecats.
Ah, true. You do find polecats.
I think in the Roman written record, I think there's some sources saying that polecats were using for ratting.
Yeah, no, I would not have thought of that. But again, I don't really work with Roman assemblages. Could probably talk about...
I guess that's the thing of working in commercial archaeology. You get a little bit of everything. So one day you're working on something Iron Age, and the next day, like next thing you know, you're on post-medieval stuff.
Fair. Let's see, what else did we miss? Did we say pigs? You get pigs occasionally.
No, I think I've got pigs, yeah.
And then we have occasionally you get fowl, depending on what context you're working on. Your chickens, your goose. Domesticated goose is a thing, right? Geese.
Think so. Oh, like you got me completely lost on birds.
Yeah, that's true. We will be having...
It's the Archaeo Animals podcast minus birds, because I'm not clever enough for that stuff. We'll get someone in who knows about birds.
To be fair, I do work on birds, mostly wild birds, so we will have an episode of that, and it will be me complaining for a solid hour, as most of these episodes will be in the future.
Should have called it Archaeo Rants.
But anyway, so those are the kind of things that you'd find. But realistically, you're looking at your sheep, you're looking at your cows. Those are like the main domestic animals you'll find. And then thinking about kind of what the characteristics are of these domestic assemblages, like you have, of course, these species. So if you find those in an assemblage, then you're kind of looking at a domestic assemblage usually, right?
Well, yes.
I mean, it also depends on the site too. I mean, it sounds very like, well, duh, but it's archaeology can get complicated.
I guess in terms of like characteristics, I guess if it's a domestic assemblage, you're more likely to find them in the rubbish pit. Because say chances are, if you've been exploiting farm animals, you would have also most likely eaten them. Or then if they were a particularly cherished animal, you would find them in burial settings. And yeah, so I guess that would be some of the characteristics of domestic assemblages.
And I mean, other than that, there's also like, kind of the fact that if they're near kind of domestic artifacts and things like that, you would associate with, if you're looking at, say, plows, I guess. I've never seen a plow because obviously that's not really in my time period, but...
Oh, so I guess now you're referring more just like domestic animal assemblages. Then I had me confused. Yeah, but usually, domestic assemblages, whenever you find dwellings or things that would have been in just common use pottery vessels, like usually not necessarily sort of really high status stuff, just your normal sort of box standard cooking storage vessels.
It's one of those cases of kind of the inner sectionality, I guess, of archaeology, where zooarchaeology you could do just fine by itself, but after a while you kind of have to include, what artifacts are nearby, things like that, and do boring stuff like ceramics.
Oh, it could be worse. It could be CBM.
What does that mean?
Oh, ceramic building material, so... For the most part, it tends to be just lumps of fired clay that would have made part of tiles and tegulae and
things that sounds so
which is again very useful, and it's great that people specialize in that.
Yeah, I don't want to.
You can actually find.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to archaeo shame anyone. Like everyone's got their own speciality, but that sounds really boring, to be honest.
I guess that it goes both ways, because I get people like several times just asking me like, what's the deal with bone? Or I'll find like a bone that I think is really interesting and I'm very happy about it, and everyone else is like, right, it's a piece of bone, isn't it? Like...
Well, the other thing that I was thinking of in terms of, domestic animals is that you can sometimes find pathological kind of evidence on bone. Like, the one that really I think about a lot is like wearing, how they have bit wear on animals that are holding onto bits in their mouths. There's that wearing that you can get on the mandibles.
Oh, especially in horses, yeah. And one thing that you get as well, so that makes it sort of certain that it was a domestic animal that was used as a working animal, is spavin in cattle feet. So it's essentially a bone growth that's caused by sort of chronic inflammation caused by the strain of traction. So you do tend to find that in cattle, and that's a pretty good indicator that it was used as a traction animal on the farm.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other ones, because I feel like there's a couple others in terms of like equipment being on cattle, like, burden-bearing animals, so cattle, horses, things like that.
Yeah, but I guess it wouldn't just be that. You'll be like seeing certain pathologies that would have perhaps happened regardless of human intervention. But the fact that they somehow survived, and you could see like that there's signs of healing in the bones, it means that there were humans there that looked after the animal. Because it probably would have been like there's certain types of injury that an animal would not survive in the wild. Yeah. So for them to have started the healing process, that implies a certain degree of care from a third party. So I think you get that in a fair few sort of dogs that are recovered from archaeological sites, and some of the really bad sort of broken bones and pathologies that you find, that you think like, yeah, this dog would not have survived had someone not taken the time to look after it.
Yeah.
So things like that. I think we might get into it a little bit more later. as well.
Oh yeah, because there's a point where, because this kind of makes it sound really easy to be like, oh, well, that's obviously domestic assemblage, but of course, real life isn't that black and white. There's a lot of complex kind of assemblages you might get. Something I'm seeing right now is just like domestic, what you would call quote unquote domestic animals and wild animals in what's like a cave. So it definitely gets dicey after a while. I don't know if you've ever noticed that in
I guess what it boils down to is that it's all about context.
context. If you learn
It is
anything
all about the
from
context.
this podcast, the most important thing you need to know about archaeology is context. God forbid you forget the context of anything.
Well, because that makes it essentially archaeologically useless if you can't tie it to an archaeological feature.
The archaeology gods will strike you down if you forget the context numbers. Or, let's say you might be a zooarchaeologist and you take two bones out of two different context bags, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, do I remember where each bone is? So now you have to put post-it notes everywhere so you remember. That's definitely not me, by the way.
Okay. Which is why sort of everything tends to be sort of painstakingly sort of labelled in a way to avoid as much data loss, because the chances are in an archaeological dig you will have to account for an amount of data loss. Is just like minimized damage.
Oh my god, yeah, it's like how recently I was on excavation and I picked up I could tell it was sheep. I picked it up and it was so waterlogged and just horribly preserved, it just kind of collapsed in my hands and it was like, oh, well, there it goes.
That's them beautiful anaerobic conditions for you. But it's also in terms of recovery of particularly small species. Because, of course, if you're hand excavating, if you're not really sieving or sampling a feature, things like fish bones and mouse bones, like they will get missed out. Because unless you've got quite an eagle eye in which like you're swinging a mattock and looking out for fish bones at the same time. I mean, hat off to you if you can. Like, I can't. But you will lose some stuff, so you never really get the full picture of what I think was, guess what we call the living assemblage. That won't quite be the death assemblage, and again, it won't be the assemblage that you actually recover. So you do lose so much sort of in the process that you really need to try and do the best with what you've got.
I wonder actually if the reason why we get so much domestic bones in a lot of assemblages is because domestic animals tend to be larger. So it's like you're not dealing with fish or like small little rodents or something. So you're always going to get like those cow bones, those horse bones, Maybe we're missing out on lots of wild animals that no one's bothered to pick up.
Or even like domesticates, because I mean, this thing, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here.
Oh, we love it though. Love a tangent.
It will be a story for another day, but that is the case of domestic cat in Britain.
Yeah.
Because, of course, you have, I think, some domestic cat has popped up from a few Iron Age sites. You get some scant evidence here and there in the Roman period. So I think, it's still sort of up in the air, of who actually brought the domestic cat to Britain. Because we don't really recover much cat. But then again, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So there's numerous arguments going round, because it's just as interesting to determine why are we not finding as much. Was it really not there, or are there other reasons, whether it be taphonomic or linked to the biology of the animal, that makes it that we can't find it?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. And I mean, it's just another example of the kind of domestic animals that I think when people think of domestic, they might not really think about, at least archaeologically, because I mean, I think people think about, especially here in the UK, so many farms get, excavated. So you're really always thinking about the kind of farm animals, but you don't really think about things like cats and dogs occasionally.
And again, like with cat, which again, in a way, brings us to a next topic, because the issue with cat as well is that there might well be a lot of material out there that is misidentified, because distinguishing domestic from wild cat is quite tricky. It's a notorious example of how difficult it can be sometimes to differentiate between domestic and wild animals. Which again, it ties us in nicely to our next sort of subtopic topic on how to differentiate between domestic and wild animals.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because there are a couple of what we would consider domestic animals that kind of have wild counterparts. Like you said, cats are probably the hardest when it comes to going between wild cat and domestic cat. But you've also got pig and wild boar. I mean, you can even count, I guess, cows and aurochs, especially depending on what time period you're working in. So that's more of my time period that I work in. But so I'm trying to think of other characteristics of domestic assemblages. Again, the context really cues you into what you're looking at. Species composition really cues you in. Pathologies, things like that. Do you know if there's anything to do with whether or not in domestic assemblages we get more of like articulated whole skeletons? I feel like that's a thing.
Not necessarily.
I guess if it had been butchered, yeah.
Because I know it really depends with finding complete skeletons, because really what you tend to get on domestic sort of sites, domestic assemblages, you'll get a fair amount of primary butchery. So you'll find the feet and the head, which, of course, if you're butchering an animal, those are the first bits to go because they're next to useless in terms of like meat bearing. And you will find meat joints with often cooking marks, or depending on the sort of economy or sort of the domestic settlement, you might find a higher proportion of feet bones with skinning mark left from tanning and making pelts and that sort of thing, but not necessarily full skeletons per se, because in that way, in a domestic setting, unless it was a pet, it makes you think, because if you've got a perfectly healthy cow that you can eat, why would you bury it?
Of course, yeah.
Really, why would you bury the whole thing unless it was either a cherished animal, unless maybe it was really ill and you really shouldn't eat it, or whether the big word ritual is involved.
It's my favorite word. I love it. That will be a whole episode as well.
Look at it. You brush your teeth every day. That's a ritual, sort of.
You brush your teeth. You kill a cow. It's all ritual, baby. But yeah, no, that's actually a really good point, though, because I always thought maybe domestic animals, because that's kind of something I really see often. But again, you can't really all put in one box, can you? Even with something as simple as domestics.
Yeah, you don't necessarily even find complete skeletons of dogs, because depending on the part of the world and the time period you're in, because even like here in Britain in the Roman period, dog was like not frequently, but it's not uncommon to find butchered dog bones.
Mm-hmm.
So they did, like, the dogs were at times working animals, cherished pets, and also meat.
Yeah, can't judge that. So I think that wraps us up for the first segment. So after this break, we'll talk more about how we differentiate between domestic and wild remains. And I'll be confused because it confuses me to this day.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of Archaeo Animals. Today we're talking about domestic animals and domestic assemblages. We're going to start talking about kind of the differences between domestic and wild remains now that we kind of know the species that make up domestic animals.
Yes, I think in the first segment started to go off on a tangent about domestic cats and how they're notoriously difficult to tell apart from wild cats. But that unfortunately does apply to a fair few animals, because really I guess how difficult it is to tell the domesticated species to its wild counterpart. It depends on how much sort of we've modified the species over time and how much we've been involved in intentional sort of selective breeding. I guess with cats is one of those species that really we've not exerted that much influence in the way they were breeding, because cat fancy and breeding for actual breeds didn't start really until the 1800s. Well, with dogs, so you start to see great morphological variations from really early on, up from the start of from the Roman period. You can just see a huge variation from really small sort of terrier-sized dogs to the big sort of Irish wolfhound type dogs. So with species like cats that we've not really played that much of a role in their breeding, you won't get that much of a difference with their wild counterparts. While for most species, I would guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually, as a rule of thumb, size does tend to be a good indicator, because as you domesticate a species, it tends to get smaller at least in the first instance. So that would be the case with aurochs and cattle and, wild boar and pig.
Yeah, basically, that's basically right. But there's a point where it can be kind of dicey. I actually was just looking into getting zooms. For people who don't know, that's zoo archaeology by mass spectrometry, I believe that's what it stands for. Something very long like that. But I was told that they can't differentiate between wild and domestic because they're too close. So it can get dicey for sure. At some points. But then you get some stuff that you can tell right away, boar and pig is something to do with the teeth. Usually
teeth measurements, so it's something you tend to achieve with the lovely biometry.
Biometry. Anything with numbers.
For those who don't know how biometry works, that you tend, because some lovely researchers spent a lot of time and effort on creating a data set where we have bone measurements of individuals of known species. So we'd have, I don't know, in the case of dog, for example, we'd have measurements of confirmed wolf and confirmed dog, and then you'll have a mean of these measurements. So when you have your assemblage and you're not too sure if the bone you found belongs to a wolf or a dog, you will take your measurements and then you'll see, I guess, which one is closest to and which mean it gets closest to. So that's likely to be the species you're looking at.
Yeah, but it's a lot of measurements, and who has time for that, really? And of course, in real life, you, not rarely, but you don't always get a full, nice, lovely bone. How many times do you get fragmented pieces? The bane of my life. We'll probably do a whole episode called Fragmented Pieces, and I just cry for a solid hour.
Yeah, it's the good thing, in some of these sort of biometry measurements, you don't necessarily need to have the whole bone, because otherwise I guess the method would be just be next to useless, because you barely ever find complete bones. But chances are you can, for the most part, for a good amount of times, you can have bones that you can actually take measurements from. It's just one of those things, because of course even biometry in itself, it does have its limitations, because it shouldn't be subjective, but it is. So if I had a bone and I took a measurement, the same measurement, and I took it and you took it and then someone else took it, chances are all three of us would have different measurements.
For sure, if you're comparing it to something I've measured, honestly. But I'm going to ask a very silly question that I've just realized that I don't actually know. Boars only have tusks. Yes or no?
In what way?
Like, does a boar have tusks and pigs don't?
Oh no, pigs will have tusks.
They will, right?
Yes.
Because I just realized...
I guess just morphologically they might be a little different.
I believe they are. I believe they are slightly different, but it's just like, it just hit me. It was like a wave of ignorance hit me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know that off the top of my head. This podcast is just turning into me revealing the fact that I don't know anything about zoo archaeology, huh?
Well, it's one thing to take home with us, because we can't know everything about everything. There's always room for more learning, and that is the beauty of life.
And if you do know everything, you're a nerd. There, said it.
Or wrong.
But yeah, no, I was just, because also I was just thinking, like, I've recently found boar tusks in an excavation, and I don't know if you felt boar tusks before, but they are so nice and smooth. They're the nicest things in the world.
Oh, they are lovely, and I think they're a good, will be perhaps a topic for a different episode, but they're also a good indicator of sex.
Are they? I actually didn't know that.
Well, because I believe the roots in the males are open because they're constantly growing throughout their life, while the females will be closed.
Yeah, okay.
Because they don't really need it as much.
I learned...
Well, I guess they'll still be useful for foraging, so like aside from, like fighting amongst each other over who gets the females, they do actually have some use in terms of, like, for foraging and digging stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the males have the added purpose of, let's find, again, the strongest of them all gets the women.
Typical.
Well, females, not women. I'm not a native English speaker. You'll have to bear with me every now and then.
Yeah, we forgive you, don't worry. Do you know what I've never found, actually, that I'd love to look at is aurochs, because they're so big from what I've seen in museums. I've only really dealt with just cows, although there's some big cows that, deep in my heart, hope are aurochs, but I don't think they are. A girl can dream.
Well, because I guess they were nearly extinct by the Bronze Age already.
No. Let me have my fantasy for a second. My archaeological fantasy.
Yeah. Well, in Britain, they endured a wee while longer in other countries. I think, like, in Poland, they lasted well into the 17th century, I believe.
Yeah. And that's actually something interesting to kind of note, is the fact that a lot of these wild variations, I guess you can call them, of domestic animals do end up kind of going extinct because we just domesticate them all, I guess, because, we're selfish like that.
And I think that there's a recurring pattern in Britain, like in the in antiquity, of just obliterating any species that may present the slightest nuisance. So of course, like, wolves went extinct quite early on. Same with bears and pine martens, beavers, you name it. They got obliterated.
We're so good, aren't we? Now, actually, speaking of wolves, with wolves and dogs, I actually find it sometimes kind of hard to differentiate between the two. They are really similar the way I see them, but I'm also, nearsighted.
No, I believe so too, because again, the issue with dogs, again, you can't really get a standard for dog, because there's just so much variation from a morphological standpoint that, you don't really have a typical dog. I mean, dogs in British archaeology, they tend to remain fairly static-ish up until the Roman period, and then it all goes a bit mad. So you do have some, like, really large sort of deerhound-sized dogs. So with those types, it might get quite difficult to differentiate them from wolves, because we are talking about just two quite large canids.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, I mean, we won't really get into it for this episode, but once we really domesticate dogs and start going into breeds, those skulls, huh?
Yes, I have opinions about them, which will probably need not even a different episode, like a podcast of its own.
Yells about
it's
dogs.
Just like Simona ranting about what we've done to dogs in the last century.
Oh god, I saw a pug skull for the first time, and it's haunted me ever since. It's so upsetting.
It just doesn't look like something that should be
alive.
God,
no, yeah. What are we doing? What have we done?
Well, because I guess the difference why a lot of these unhealthier species are popping up is because we've stopped breeding for function, or we're not breeding for function as much, and we're breeding for looks aesthetics and what people think is cute. I suppose that you wouldn't have had perhaps such unhealthy specimens back in the Roman period because you would have had your lap dogs and cherished pets, but for the most part, the dog was there to serve a function. Whether it was a guard dog or a herding dog, it had to do something.
Yeah. So,
I can't see applying a pug to much use.
I don't know. They're fun.
Aside from standing in a corner, breathing heavily.
Oh, I stand in the corner and breathe heavily. You're telling me I'm not useful?
I couldn't possibly comment, but that's what I tend to do as well, so we'll join the club.
But yeah, so anyway, when it comes to learning about, past societies, past settlements, things like that, from domestic assemblages, I think there is a ton of information you can get from these kind of assemblages. I mean, between what kind of animals they're able to domesticate to what kind of products they're probably getting. I mean, you can basically write like a whole book on an assemblage, domestic assemblage that you find, more or less, huh?
Absolutely. And one thing that's underestimated, I guess from people who are not in zoo archaeology, is how much you can use actually the presence of certain species over others to reconstruct the environment how it was at a time, because you have certain species are more suited, even if domesticates, they're more suited to a particular type of environment, because while sheep would prefer like open grazing, in sort of low woodland, cow and pig will get on just fine. And you do tend to find pig remains around orchards or small woodland areas. And of course you would have had, even though the notoriously difficult again sheep and goat, that it's really difficult to tell them apart. But in a way, the environment in which you find them also tells you something, because the two species, although morphologically very similar, they are adapted to different terrains. We saw the goat being more of a jack of all trades, and you can have them in more remote areas and up hills and mountains, and they'll get on just fine, while the sheep will struggle a little bit more.
Yeah, and also speaking of like pigs and kind of difficult to domesticate type of animals, like there's a reason why when people find pigs on settlements, especially like later prehistoric settlements, they immediately think, oh, this has to do with status, is because pigs are notoriously hard to care for, from what I understand.
Well, it's that, and so much, and it's also the case that pigs, well, in a way, they are kind of useless. As in, like,
huge slam on pigs out of nowhere.
No, I'm not going on to a pig-hating rampage. I do.
Simona
love
is anti-pig. You've heard it here first.
Hey, in our first episode, you talked about how much pigs and pig teeth gross you out, so
I still love them.
Both as bad as each other.
That's fair.
No, but I do love pigs, but from the standpoint as, say, a local farmer that's got a small farm, in a small settlement, and maybe it's just one large family unit. If you have sheep, you can get meat out of it, wool, milk. Same with cattle, you can get milk out of it. You can use it for traction. You can also eat it. The pig just eats your rubbish, and then when it's old enough, you eat it. And that's about all it does. Like, it won't really serve any more purpose or provides you with any other products but its meat once it reaches the subadult stage. So in a way, like, it's not as affordable to keep pigs, in a way. Even though I guess they'll be, not much cheap. Well, they'll be cheap enough to feed, but it's just, they won't really pull their weight, if that makes sense.
And also, you do need tons of land to keep pigs properly. So it's that kind of like upkeep that you have, and like you said, the fact that the energy you put in to keep the animal versus what they give back isn't as balanced towards your favor as, say, sheep or cattle or things like that. And I believe horses are the same, which is why they were kind of like a status animal in some cases.
I guess also horses were expensive, at least in the Roman period, so they were for the most part well looked after, and I'll give it nice burials when need be as well. They're just harder to come by, so once you did manage to get your horse, you'd look after it.
And I think that's why you get like those kind of burials that you see with horses and people intermingled, more or less. I mean, you get like those chariot burials and things like that around here in Britain.
Because in a way it's also cultural as well, because even though it's also a domesticated animal, not unlike cattle and sheep and pig, there's in a way there's a different bond that humans have established with horses, because ever since the practice of just horse riding, whether it be for transport or for warfare, like you do have a different type of bond that was established between people and their horses, like not unlike people and their dogs or whatnot. So the treatment would have been different from how you would have treated other domesticates. So I guess that also has an impact in the way they were treated, and we find them in the archaeological record.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's almost kind of like a reverse too, the way I think of it, in that we can learn stuff from the domestic assemblage themselves, and there's also things we can learn about the domestic assemblage from, say, artifacts, and how people store them, because you see horse motifs on, armory and items that are associated with high status and stuff like that. Same with pigs. I mean, especially in later prehistoric Britain, you find a lot of weaponry with boars and things like that. So it's like it's a back and forth of just kind of how we store these animals, especially, and you see that more with domestics because humans had so much more interaction with them on a day-to-day basis. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, it does. Again, it's all about context. It's not just about the bones itself, it's just everything coming together. So really, like, we look at bones specifically, like ourselves, and for the purpose of the podcast, but really to just get the clear picture, you need to look at the material culture, the depictions, the written record, if there is one, and the zooarchaeological evidence, and then you put it all together, and it gives you a beautiful picture of what things were possibly like in your time period of choice.
Yeah, I can't wait for episode 30 when it's just us chanting the word context over and over again for an hour. It's all that matters, guys. Just take the bones and throw them away. It's all about context, baby. No, don't do that, please. That's my job, is to look at those bones. Please don't throw them out. But yeah, I think that brings us to the end of this segment. And after this break, we'll be back to talk about some examples of domestic assemblages and ancient farms and all that other kind of fun stuff. So, see you after the break.
Bye.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of Archaeoanimals. Today we're talking about domestic animals, who they are, what do we do with them, all that kind of fun stuff. And now we're going to be talking about some examples of domestic assemblages. Now, the hard part about this was, how do you narrow it down? Because how many archaeological sites are domestic sites, really?
Yeah, I think it was a particularly hard one. So I think what we went for what I guess an actual archaeological site dating back from the Bronze Age, and then we looked at a reconstruction of what an ancient farm would have been like.
Yeah, because I think that's a good juxtaposition. They're probably 2 of the most famous farms, I'd like to say, archaeological farms.
I believe so. And
Because
also,
they're the
it's
ones
a
I
really
think
good thing
of.
because I heard of I'd heard of both sort of sites, but I did not know very much about the reconstruction of the ancient farm, and now I'm really keen on paying a visit.
Oh, yeah, same. We can talk about that when we get to it.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah. So first off, kind of the more traditional excavation site, we have Must Farm, which is a late Bronze Age settlement at Whittlesey. I can't say any of the names of places in this country.
Oh,
Whittlesey.
how is it spelled?
Whittlesey. Folks, if you're listening at home and you want to complain, don't send me your tweets. I know I can't pronounce any of these names at all. I've only just started saying Lancashire.
Oh, yeah, there's some, I think again, it'll be an extra episode of its own, like foreigners in Britain mispronouncing stuff all the time. It was the case for me, I think, like when I first moved to the UK, I moved to Warwickshire. It took me quite a while to realise that it was Warwickshire, not Warwickshire. So, that's that. But back to Must Farm. So, yeah, as you said, it is a late Bronze Age settlement. For those who are not familiar with sort of like these easy, I guess, buzzwords that we use in archaeology, which I don't personally massively like, but they are useful because it usually gives people a very good indication of the period you're talking about. The Late Bronze Age goes from around 1000 to 800 BC. And now in the particular case of Must Farm, why it's a really interesting one to talk about as a case study is because unlike a lot of sites in this country, it actually boasts an incredible artifact and ecofact preservation. So,
it's wild.
Especially archaeological wood is just, wild. Because that is very seldomly recovered in British archaeology.
And it's got, from what I understand, it's like built on the river channel, isn't it? They've got these wood, like, poles, stick things.
Yeah, it's like, it's sort of almost like sunk into the river channels, like the settlement is built on piles or stilts.
Which is so crazy.
It would have been a fairly, well, I wouldn't say, I'm not sure boggy is the right term, but it wouldn't have been dry.
It's wet. It's moist. To use a really great word, it's very moist, everyone. Everyone's turned off the podcast now.
But surprisingly, they did recover a fair amount of sheep, which usually you'd think you wouldn't do very well in that environment.
Yeah, that's the nuts thing about it is that they've got such a huge and amazing assemblage, both domestic and wild, but of course we'll be talking about domestics. They've got a lot of sheep.
In a way, like, Must Farm is a very nice sort of almost like still caption of what life would have been like in the late Bronze Age, although the site itself didn't last very long, because it is argued that the site was running, say, like the settlement for around perhaps 6 months, because then it kind of burnt down.
Yeah, just a little bit burnt down to the ground.
But in a way, I mean, it would have sucked for them, big time.
Yes.
But one, I guess, silver lining of it is because a lot of people literally dropped whatever they were doing and made a runner, understandably so.
Of course.
They left us, because thanks also to the preservation of artifacts, it left us a wealth of material evidence. So we've recovered vessels that actually still had their meals in them.
Which is so cool.
Because you wouldn't have been having a nice time if you're just enjoying your tea, just, sat down, looking at the landscape, and then everything's burning down.
I mean, if it was me, I probably would have ran with it. Like, if I had a cake and I was eating it, I would have picked that up and ran with it. I'm not going to waste a cake kind of burning.
Cake.
Yeah, the late Bronze Age cake.
Yeah, but it's good because it gives us an idea of their meals and what they would have eaten. Because, of course, they wouldn't have exactly left us a recipe book. So,
yeah, and I'm they've got, I mean, this isn't really animals, but they've got like burnt cereal grains and things like that, which is, something that's really important and exciting for reconstructing the kind of diets. And then with regards to the animals, they've got a lot of like, there's a bit of a differentiation between the animals that are found within the like the roundhouses and buildings, and found with like outside. So a lot of domesticates seem to have been found inside, including sheep and cattle, from what I saw.
Yes, I think like inside within the roundhouses, it was mostly semi-articulated juvenile sheep and cattle, which again, as I mentioned earlier, like it's not uncommon for the time period, but it is interesting because of the boggy, again for lack of a better word, environment.
The moist
Must Farm is set in.
The moist environment.
The moist Must Farm bog.
I just thought of the moist sheep.
Where is my bog unicorn?
Oh God, right? That might be that. We might have to talk about bogs and animals at some point. Are those a thing, really? I can't. I mean, bogs are more associated with humans, but I'm sure there's bog animals.
Oh, we'll have an extra sode on the archaeology of the fallow mile.
We're talking about video games, guys, so if you're lost, don't worry. Everyone will be lost now. But going back to the farms. Must Farm is a great example, I think, of a very contained, nice... This is kind of what a domestic site would be like, cut and dry, minus the moistness of the site itself. But we also have the other farm that we were going to talk about is a little bit different because it's actually, as Simona was talking about earlier, an experimental recreation type farm. So if you want to start talking about that.
Yeah, so like Butzer Ancient Farm is actually a reconstruction of an Iron Age ancient farm. Just is an interesting, and actually it's actually a good setting for research as well, because as far as I'm aware, there's a lot of researchers that actually visit the farm and experimental archaeologists to just, again, like try and further our understanding of what day-to-day life was like during that time period. So, and I think they do a lot of stuff in terms of sort of outreach for community and children. I think they practice, or they do sort of, I don't want to say bushcraft, but they do teach sort of like traditional skills.
Yeah, I mean they're all kind of adjacent to what we're talking about with domestic animals as well, because it's kind of what the kind of domestic settlement type place would be, and it seems really like well done from what I've seen. It was experimental archaeology site since the 1970s, so a lot of people have been going there to do kind of very experimental things. And now they raise a bunch of ancient breeds of animals and plants, which is super bonkers.
Oh yeah, I was about to say, because they'll have like specific modern breeds, but that are the closest living animals that we have to some of the more ancient breeds. There's a bit like a similar parallel if you look on, never know how to pronounce this, Soay sheep.
Oh yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it either.
They're a Scottish breed, but they are the closest you'd get to the sheep that were more widespread in the Roman period.
Yeah.
No, that isn't to say that the Romans had Soay sheep.
But it was close.
Because, as we'll discuss in a later episode, breed is something that you cannot distinguish in the archaeological record. Unfortunately, it's not happening.
Not until we have time travel.
Oh, yes. If only the Doctor dropped here anytime
Absolutely
soon.
useless, honestly.
As he's fictional, he will not. And that is life. That's why we can't have nice things.
So it looks like they only have goats and pigs. I don't know if you saw anything different, but...
That might well be the case. In my head, I was picturing, like, ancient breed of sheep as well, but...
I saw mostly pictures of goats and pigs, to be honest. But, I mean, what they're doing with plants, at least, is kind of like, I guess, almost like a snapshot of what they would probably hopefully be doing in the future with animals, because I saw that they had recently been working with species recovery. So they recently recovered the darnel plant, which apparently hasn't been grown in like hundreds of thousands of years or something. And that's super
That's
cool.
excellent. And it's also like great for outreach purposes as well, because you'd be surprised of how much of the stuff that we eat and we take for granted on a daily basis are actually species that were imported by someone else, usually the Romans,
Of course.
but not only limited to the Romans. Like if you think of potatoes and tomatoes that we eat on a daily basis and we sort of take for granted that they grow here quite happily, sort of, when they're actually not native to this country. And of course, by saying this country, we keep going back to Britain, which I know can be a bit annoying for some, because we do try and cover as many parts of the world and time periods as we can, but we do tend to go back to Britain an awful lot because we're both based here. So apologies for that.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone has good, interesting facts about domesticates and domestic living in the past from where you're from or where you work, please feel free to put it in the hashtag Archaeoanimals, because I'd love to read about it. It'd be nice to take a break from learning about British stuff, honestly.
Absolutely. There'll be stuff like camels and donkeys, which we have completely left out, but we've not really had them here. I mean, we have donkeys and mules from the Roman period. Yeah. There was some breeding to an extent, but a lot of the mules, I believe, as well, were imported animals that were actually born on the continent and were brought to Britain.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So, and I think, I'm not too sure whether camels ever been recovered from here, but I wouldn't be awfully surprised if it did, because, I mean, you do find big cats and all sorts of beautiful things that the Romans would just bring here because they could.
Because they could and they wanted to. It was basically the Roman thing.
So, yeah, I wouldn't be astonished if there was actually like camel being recovered from sites in Britain.
Yeah, no, actually, now that you mention it, like I totally, when I was writing up and thinking of this episode, I didn't even bother to think about domesticated animals in other places because that's the kind of selfish person I am, apparently. But that's really interesting.
Well, it's more like that. That's what we know best. Yeah. So I personally, we like to provide correct information. I feel that if we branch out a bit too much, I might say something that may not be entirely untrue, and we'll have to like start like a penalty system. So every time we say something that's wrong, we'll have to, I don't know, sing a song about pigs and ritual.
No, I think the penalty system should be if we get something wrong, we have to process and clean a fish completely. Oh. See?
And now you just been
cruel. That is, but you know what? It'll make us completely factual.
That's twisted.
I'm sorry, that is pretty cruel. But yeah, no, this place looks, Butzer Farm looks so cool. They also do events. I mean, we'll put the links to both of these case studies in the show notes, but especially Butzer Farm looks really cool, especially if you're out there and you have kids or you work in like education and are thinking of kinds of field trips and things like that. It looks so awesome, and they do so many cool things spanning from like the Neolithic over to the Roman Iron Age. So
yeah, and they do outreach, and that's my biggest love. Outreach all the time, everywhere, all the time. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, that's why we have a podcast.
or just the very fact of being archaeologists. Like I just do it. Yeah, we preserve our heritage, and it's for the public. Because we all own our heritage, if that makes sense. I might not be using the best words away, but heritage belongs to everyone.
Yes.
So it needs to be out there.
Yes.
There you go.
Also,
so that's my other pearl of wisdom for this episode. Going like wise woman all over the place.
Also, did you see that Butzer Farm has a Beltane celebration?
Yes, I was actually discussing with other Alex that we should probably attend.
Oh man, I really want to attend too. This is getting off topic of archaeology, but it's really cool. It looks awesome. And I guess we're doing free publicity for them, so good for them. But yeah, I think that kind of wraps up this episode in terms of, you know, domestic animals. As you can tell, they're simultaneously very easy and also very complex, which I think is the case for most things in zooarchaeology.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess there's probably plenty that we left out, but I think like every episode would have to be 12 hours for us to cover everything. But hopefully, like when this episode comes out, I'll start that again because that wouldn't sound very good. But yeah, it'll probably take just 12 hours to cover the entire topic, and we still wouldn't be quite done with it. But you will find show notes linked to the episode that hopefully will tell you a little bit more. And we always like to put a little bibliography at the end, illustrating the sources that we used, but also a couple of other things that you can read. And I mean, as much as is feasibly possible, we try to use open access sources. So even if you're not a student who has subscriptions to weird and wonderful journals, you should be able to get more information on the subject without any limitations or having to pay money for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And next episode, we'll be talking about probably one of at least my favorite topics in general, not just talking about archaeology. We'll be talking about doggos. Yeah. Those good doggos. I mean, they'll be dead. I mean, I don't know if that rains on anyone's parade. They will be dead, but, you know.
I don't know, we could already announce the special guest for the episode. My own dog will be there throughout the recording. So, you will get dead dogs, but also a very much alive dog, even almost too alive sometimes. She's a herding dog and very, very, very energetic and must jump with you at all times. So...
But yeah, no, it will be good. We'll talk a lot about, differences in dogs. We'll definitely have an entire segment dedicated to Simona talking about how we've harmed dogs through breeding and what their skulls look like. And I think it'll be great. So yeah, look out for that.
Again, me having a tangent about why you can't determine breed from archaeological dog remains.
So yeah, this has been the second episode of Archaeo Animals. I'm Alex Fitzpatrick again.
And I'm Simona. Please do tune back in for cute doggos, dead doggos, and endless tangents.
Nice.
Thank you for listening to Archaeo Animals. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. You can find us on Twitter at Archaeo Animals. Also, the views expressed on the podcast are those of ourselves, the hosts and guests, and do not necessarily represent those of our institution, employers, and the Archaeology Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.